Good day, everybody. Thank you for being here on this Saturday morning. I'm Atul Kumar, trustee of Art Deco Mumbai Trust. I'm delighted to welcome all of you and our trustees, Professor Mustan Sirdalvi, Sujata Parekh Kumar, members of my team from Art Deco Mumbai, residents of Swastik Court, the building contractor who did an outstanding job, and of course, both the ladies from the Asiatic Society of Mumbai, Dr. Nalwala and Vispi Balaporwala. I'm particularly delighted to welcome Vikas and Robert Stephens today with us. We all know of their outstanding professional capabilities, but for me, they are not just architects. They are deeply invested in the city and the idea of Bombay, that they bring a commitment to the urban culture of this city, its ways of living, its history, people, and places. Vikas is a practicing conservation architect with over 3 decades of experience. I like to think, and I'm taking a liberty here, Vikas, that if there is a historic landmark in Mumbai, one can be reasonably sure Vikas had some role to play in its continued existence, if not its restoration. His practice has executed around 55 conservation projects, and the sheer volume of work Vikas has put into this city is hugely impactful, be it the Flora Fountain, the Ma Hajiana Dargah at Worli, the Bhavdaji Lad Museum in Baikala, the centenary repairs and restoration of the museum itself, and the lobby recently of a residential Art Deco building in Malabar Hill. The testimony to his success are the 18 projects that have been led by him, which won the UNESCO Asia Pacific Awards for Cultural Preservation in Southeast Asia. That is a really significant achievement. He has led the charge of preserving the city's urban character for the last few decades. My friend Robert Stephens moved to Mumbai from South Kerala in 2007 and made this city his home. As he's fond of saying, I came and I never left. He is principal architect at RMA Architects and is part of their core team responsible for projects like the CSMVS Visitor Center, the Children's Museum, the under construction M.R. Ambedkar Crematorium at Worli. His design aesthetic, from what little I have seen, lends dignity to those who have passed and solace to their families and loved ones. He has also undertaken the restoration and adaptive reuse of the Kasturba Lalbhai residence in Ahmedabad. Robert's book, Bombay Imagined, I'm sure needs no introduction to this audience. In his own words, this true love letter to the city's unbuilt history was conceived in the meditative depths of the Mumbai local train in 2013 and matured through various lockdowns during the pandemic. I think amongst other things, he also put the Mumbai local train in a very unique context in which none of us have quite looked at it. If you haven't got a copy of his book, you should. It's a visual delight to say the least, and a true treat for any researcher, archivist, and Mumbai lover. Thank you, Vikas, and thank you, Robert, for being here today. I'm going to quickly run you through the program for the event today, which is just 4 short sessions. Before I present, and by virtue of these 2 gentlemen being present here today, I'd like to put an E and OE, which means errors and exceptions omitted. Errors and omissions accepted. They have done a huge volume of work that spreads across the city and across architectural styles. This is our first book. I'm sure there'll be many shortcomings, but I do look forward to their constructive criticism. I'll quickly give you a little talk through about the project that we did. We'll release the book, and then we'll have a conversation with Robert and Vikas, and followed by a Q&A with all of you. This book fulfills a very interesting and unique need which was lacking and which has not been available as a resource, simply because the focus of Bombay's conservation and restoration has largely been around historic structures which are made of stone. And there is almost none done on RCC structures. And when you look at the visual identity of the city, you think of iconic properties like the Gateway of India, you look at the Bombay High Court, VT Station, the CSMVS Museum, and these are all built using, stone and some of them even timber. We were invited by the residents of Swastik Court to participate in their project to repair and restore their building, and it emerged as a unique stakeholder initiative showing how you could do this to a modern building made of cement and brick. We had many useful learnings from the residents of these properties, from conservation architects, and it's also a valuable guide for students, planners, and residents. So effectively, the handbook is now a shared resource that's made available in the public domain, and we have priced it very affordably so that it is accessible by all. Today you're getting it at a 10% discount, and it's available at the back of the room on a table over there. The idea is essentially to sensitize people about respecting the integrity of a building's property, its design, and that even by doing a little, it can go a long way. What we did basically for the residents was provided our professional inputs. We have conservation architects working for us full-time. They provide their skill sets and resources. We have a lot of archival material which is useful for reference in terms of motifs that may have been lost, color palettes, original design of the structure. And importantly, I think we also act as a kind of middle ground between residents and the contractor, who is a key person, as we all know, in terms of execution. And this being assessed property, the contractor has to be one who is appointed and approved by MHADA. The book has these sections, and I'm not going to run you through each one of these here. You can, when you get a copy, you can see all the highlights of the project. The last 2 points are important because what you really see is a visual representation of what the building looked like before it was repaired and restored, and then what possibilities that afforded and how it was transformed into what it looks like today. For context, it's important to note that this property is located within the UNESCO World Heritage Site. So you have a perspective. This is Regal Cinema, and then this is oval. You have the line of Victorian Gothic structures here, and you have the HSBC building and the Bank of India building here. This is the oval precinct with the 18 Art Deco buildings. Dinshawacha Road, which is the connector leading to Marine Drive. This stadium is the Brabant Stadium at the Cricket Club of India. And this, of course, is the row of 35 consecutive buildings along Marine Drive, which makes for such a fabulous vista. Within this property of 164 acres, 92 buildings, of which 76 are Art Deco, 12 are Victorian Gothic, 4 are neoclassical. We have 3 Indo-Saracenic properties and 1 Victorian industrial. And of course, we have, as I said, the 2 banks at the top here. Yeah. Within this, Swastik Court is located at the Oval Maidan. So here, this is Eros Cinema, which I'm sure all of you know. And the 4th building from Eros is Swastik Court. And this whole precinct is, of course, Art Deco. The problem with modern heritage, and when I say modern, essentially I'm referring to any property that's been built using RCC and brick. That's a very simple, easy way to define that period, is that it does not typically fit the definition of heritage. The reason being that the Architectural Society of India defines a built property as heritage only if it's more than 100 years old. That limits and excludes everything that's not 100 years old. We also have so many, we have such a rich culture and such a rich heritage. Humayun's tomb, for example, in Delhi is 450 years old. And the problem in Bombay is that we have such an abundance of modern heritage that it makes it almost ordinary and makes us take the style for granted. The approach to heritage, therefore, has been typically monument-centric. So even Gateway of India is essentially a monument. And our focus has largely been on these, and not the modern Bombay that we actually built ourselves, and not our legacies we inherited from our colonial past. And then, of course, the last is that there are really no case studies for people to refer to and to be inspired by. And I thought, since we've done this project, we can attempt to change that. Swastik is, you can read here, it's built in 36, and it's a ground plus 5-story structure, one of the few buildings along the Oval with most of its character-defining features intact. Sometimes it's good not to have too much consensus and not to have too many funds, because then you essentially leave the property alone, which keeps its authenticity intact. And I remember Naina telling us before we took up this building, Naina Katpale is a resident in this building, that if you had to come to their building, they said, just come to the most decrepit looking building on the street. Once you find that, that's where we live. And today I'm glad that she says, just come there, and the fanciest, gorgeous looking property, that's where we live now. So the whole address has changed for them. The process is, as we know, as Bombay people know, I think, I'd like to put it, is that we have such a complicated structure of ownership, right? We have residents, we have the landlord, we have Art Deco Mumbai, where we are involved giving our inputs, we have a contractor, you have MHADA, and then you also have the collector and you have the municipal corporation. So it's a daunting project whenever you want to look up the opportunity of taking care of a modern building, because of the complex ownership structures. And even residents in this building particularly included both tenants and flat owners. So it added another layer. This picture, you can see my colleague Nitya Lakshmi Iyer engaging with the residents and presenting how we envisioned the building could look with minimal intervention. The philosophy essentially was very simple, and I think this is something I've also heard Vikas say, and I've learned it from him, is that less is more. Documentation and oral histories contribute hugely to show us what we can do with the property. And in this building, we had, Naina has lived there since she was 1 year old. So we have a rich history of the property, the families, the color palettes, the motifs, the designs, and she's been really quite amazing. And then, of course, managing and engaging with the contractor. That's very important, because the language that all sets of stakeholders speak is different, if you know what I mean. And so communicating correctly and accurately was very important. And at the end of the day, we all know that we're all strapped for funds, right? Everybody has limited budgets. Everybody has problems in getting contributions from all the from the tenants. So a big part of our role is also to ensure that we make sure it's done cost effectively. And I think that appeals to a lot of the stakeholders. And then at the end of the day, with so many people and so many approvals involved, I think it's a constant process of negotiation. And that is something where I think we have a useful role to play, because our alignment is with the residents and with the property. And therefore, we're always looking at their best interests and negotiating that amongst them and with the contractor. I quickly switch to some pictures now just to show you how the building looked, and many parts, features, and elements looked before and after. the terrace of this building. So this is where the, on the roof, you had a swastik sign that was made in the flooring, and you can see how the contractor has restored it so beautifully with the original material and with the original design. It's a bit smaller in scale and size, but it's important because it was part of the identity of the property and reflects the name, and we were successful in convincing the contractor, Mr. Savani, that he should do this because we had at this point run out of the budget. And he said, okay, this stops here. There's no swastik on this terrace. And we said, no, there has to be a swastik, and we're not giving up till it comes up. And I must credit my colleague Nitya, who, my language was a little harsher, but she was much more conciliatory and managed to convince him to do this. So that's what I mean when I say, you know, the negotiation of conversation amongst all the stakeholders. This is the lobby of the building, and it's really, as you can see, it's exactly the same. All we did was get it cleaned, polished, painted, and it's got a whole new life to it. The colors are rich and vibrant. The Art Deco flooring, 85 years old, still intact and in gorgeous color palette. Cuboid shapes, directionality towards the elevator, and those two perpendicular lines that you can, vertical lines that you can see. Beautiful teakwood paneling around the elevator. This is the balconies of this building. Swastik Court is special also because it's one of the only properties where all the balconies, not one is enclosed. So unlike most Bombay properties where people have taken them in, they've put aluminum windows or done whatever they need. And we're not passing any judgment on that. There is a constraint of space in the city and in the homes of which people occupy. Families have grown. But this property is very special for that. And you can see how well it's been restored. And again, a little bit of civil work, painting, polishing, and materials from the 1930s are of outstanding quality. This wrought iron goes back to 1936. The wooden banister goes back to that date. So we said, we don't need to replace anything. That was the philosophy. And one important lesson we learned was that, you know, all the residents said, you know, why can't we each individually paint our balconies? Because everybody thought their individual contractor can do a better job, and also it can be possibly a little less expensive. And we insisted that the same contractor do all the balconies. So there is a consistency in the facade and a harmony in the design, which you normally gets compromised because each apartment owner wants to do it on their own. So for example, the wood could be of a different shade. Somebody may paint their grills white instead of black, and suddenly you do have a restored building, but the facade is a bit compromised. This is one of my favorite examples. You can see the compound wall. Again, all original materials. We did not break anything. We did not rebuild anything. We straightened the wrought iron. It was scraped. It was, you know, treated for a minor corrosion and then painted. The columns were restored. I love the speed lines that we discovered at the bottom. There are 4 of them here. Very classic Art Deco feature. You can see it doesn't even exist here. And minor things, you know, this cap on top of this is actually gently sloping towards the pavement. So when it rains, water never collects, and it just flows off naturally. That's what we call, you know, good design. In this, I was hoping to show you the groove over here. It's not come out very clearly in the photograph, but again, you can see, you know, the speed lines at the bottom. And this is a very interesting but unique problem in Mumbai, where the building compound wall is almost 9 inches lower than the street level. Because in Bombay, they keep building and repaving the pavements and the road, and there is a level difference of almost anywhere between 9 inches and 12 inches between the property and the street, which is also part of the problem for flooding and such like. The building entrance at some point in time uh, the residents added this gate over here. This was original. We suggested that this be replaced, and to be honest, I think in the entire property, this was the one replacement that was done. Also because it was not original, it was a later intervention. We gave them several designs that were in harmony with the grill work above the door and also on the compound wall and the balcony grills. And you can see how this is such a design that's in consonance with the overall building integrity. And we made adjustments. We put a lot of wire mesh over here because there were complaints of cats and rodents entering. And then this section, just this block, is openable so that they could, pick up their milk and then shut it again. And I think it served them very well in the pandemic when they were able to minimize exposure to meeting people and not risking themselves. The building canopy, so you can see here, this is the canopy at the entrance, and it has Swastik Court written in a metal font, and there are these 3 bas reliefs on top, and there's an air conditioning unit that was installed over here. One of the highlights of the property, this was what we saw, and it just looked like it had been painted white, and there was, we couldn't make out what it was made of, whether there was anything below it. We could clearly see that it was in pristine condition, not a single chip or crack anywhere in this. My colleague Nitya, who I've talked about later, sat and painstakingly cleaned this with a coir rope, which was just wet with water, and gently cleaned the layers and layers and layers of paint. And I think somewhere we can credit Vikas for this because Nitya actually worked with him before she joined us. And her painstaking work resulted in some incredible discovery of what that bas relief actually looked like. And you can see here, there's a riot of color, beautiful birds in 3 panels. This is a close-up, and you can see red, green, yellow, orange. And this photograph really highlights the 3D detailing of this work, which may not be visible when you see it from the street. And just look at these images. More than anything else, I think it reinforces the stated objective of less is more. And we worked very closely with Kansai Nerolac Paints, who assisted us in this, and they gave us a water-based paint remover, which they created specially for this by coming and visiting the property. And thereafter, after they saw this, they created a varnish. And they said, if you apply this clear varnish, you're going to see, preserve this. It will not attract any humidity. There will be no moisture. There will be no fungus. And it will keep it clean. And incredibly, it has worked extremely well. This is now what our 3rd monsoon approaching. And if you go and see this at the building, it looks exactly like this. There has been no deterioration in the bas relief. So the building has come full circle, and this really is what it looks like today. We can't show you a picture of the whole facade because we have such a rich tree cover along the oval and along Queens Road or Maharshi Karve Marg that there's no one angle that captures the whole property. So this is a rendering of it as it looks today. And if you do go by there, please have a look. So I'd like to move on to the book release now, and I'd like to request Rotary Club of Bombay, who funded the production of this book, and HDFC Limited, to whom we're really grateful. Today we have with us Renu Basu, who's the chairperson of the Heritage Committee, Urban Heritage Committee of Rotary. Renu, if you could please come. If we can come in front, then that would be good, please. And of course, the true heroes of this project, without a doubt, are the landlords of this fine property, Mr. Gaurang Kinkabhala and his wife Mamta. Please come up in front. And there's another very, very important cog in this whole wheel, and that is the one person we all love to hate, right? The contractor. The guy who is responsible for delayed execution, cost overruns, no manpower, poor quality of work being done, etc., etc. In this case, Mr. Savani ji, he's a real champion, you know. And he was assigned to this project by MHADA, and I cannot tell you how responsive, receptive, and careful he was with his costing and his estimates. And most importantly, I think when he didn't know something, he was happy to leave it and let us do the work and learn from this experience. And I was delighted to know that he's now got at least one or two more buildings on the Oval, and all the residents have asked him to manage the restoration. So, Savani ji, आप भी आइए, please. Let's get straight into the conversation, and like any comments, observations on the work, your experiences, etc. Please. I don't want to limit it directly to a specific question. So, Robert, you want to go ahead?
So thanks, Atul. Thanks, everyone. I must say, you might have heard Atul reference, I like the local trains, right? I consider it actually, for me, it's the most peaceful place in Bombay. Because if you choose to be isolated, no one will bother you. So I received an advance copy of the book last week, so I've been reading it every day in the train. And what I do as I find something, I just kind of circle it, and then at the back of the book, I make my notes. So these are my notes. So if anyone saw, you know, like a random white person in the train scribbling notes on a Swastik Court Handbook, like that was me. No, it's really fabulous. And I love books, right? And I think that's a general human trend. When we entered this hall, I looked at the paintings on the wall. There are 9 paintings. Out of these 9 portraits, 7 of the individuals have books or papers in their hands. If you just look around, right? It's fabulous. And in many cases, the books we create outlive the buildings we live in, right? John Wilson, his house is long gone, right? But the books he wrote and published are in the library across the hall. So I guess my first reaction is thank you to everyone who worked on the publication, because I love the personalization of it. It takes the building from the kind of conventional Art Decos about, you know, simple graphics, and it's also about people. It's even more so about people. Which I just will talk maybe more about that, but that was my first reaction. So do read it in the train if you get, you have some time, or as you're commuting across the city. It's a fabulous and convenient, handy-sized read as well.
It's a very, what we saw in this book is something which we've been trying to practice and put it in a very condensed version, in a very simple way. And I'm so glad it's reached a stage where people, it's not just the professionals, but everyone is sensitized to understand and to appreciate the buildings in which they are staying and to care for it. I think these are the 2 most important words which we are lacking in a city. And that comes forward as a simple example. As Atul rightly said, it has to be a great teamwork. It's a very difficult task to get, at least in a housing society or in a building, to get everyone on the same page and understand the same language. And I can tell you this because this is what we've been practicing. Many times you've been successful in convincing, and many times you failed. But one mantra is try to do the least bad compromise. And I think that's how we can keep going. So a tremendous job and very well put in a simple manner. And I hope more people will get aware, because our city has so many properties which are actually, they look run down, but if you really conserve them, as he was citing an example of Naina mentioning the address before and after, I can tell you a similar example. There was a Parsi colony which I was refused to take photograph because it was so dilapidated. And after restoration, people go there to click photographs. And people now stand proudly in the balconies and they also, wave out. So that's what the difference can be.
Thank you, Vikas. I have a quick question for the audience. How many of you live in a building that's built of cement and brick? Okay, so that's an interesting observation, and I think, therefore, this book is of interest to you, and this conversation is definitely of interest to you, because it could show you how the value of your property could essentially be improved, and more importantly, the quality of life that it affords each one of you. Vikas, quick question. There's been this whole focus on heritage as defined by properties that are more than 100 years old, and they're all stone. And modern Bombay, effectively post the 1920s and the reclamations and the development schemes that took place, are all built using a different material. So what are the challenges in shifting from these two materials, from stone to cement, and how do practitioners engage with that?
So that's a very important question which you raised. Most of the Victorian buildings are stone buildings with lime plaster and things like that, with wooden beams and things. But when we come to 20th century buildings, they are in reinforced cement concrete. Now in conservation, you're taught basically to use like-to-like material, a lot of use of lime and other things. So, but when it comes to a building which is composite, something like Prince of Wales Museum or Chhatrapati Shivaji Vastu Sangrahalaya, the building is done in stone, but it has concrete slabs and RCC and everything. So what kind of an approach would you do there? You certainly can't use lime where cement has been used. So we have to be judgmental as per the specific case. And what you rightly said in your presentation is that most of these buildings which were constructed in 1930s and 40s have lived very good life, and they're easy to maintain as compared to many recent buildings which you see if you go to Navi Mumbai and other things. They're just 10 years old and you can already see cracks being addressed and all this thing happening, whereas these have lasted so long, and that itself speaks for itself. That these are good and they just need to be cared after.
Working with the city's built form creates various degrees of negotiation, right, between all the stakeholders. And in Bombay, we have two kinds of ownership. We have privately owned apartment buildings, which most of us live in. And then you have public sites, like you have the Flora Fountain, which was done by Vikas. You have the Worli Crematorium, which is being done by Robert. The stakeholders are completely different. You have the state on one side and you have private properties and individuals on the other, with a layer of the state thrown in. Robert, would you like to talk a little bit about that?
That's a very dangerous question. I'll react to what I've read because I found it very inspiring. I think as practitioners, we have a certain, and as residents, we have a certain assumption that that either contractors or people from government affiliations will not have our interest in mind, possibly. That's an assumption, I think. And it's not always the case. And I was very encouraged to read about Mahadeoji. He made 20 mock-ups of colors for this building. Like, on private projects, when we ask for 5 mock-ups, the contractors, they walk away, he made 20 mock-ups. Just this kind of commitment to meeting everyone's aspirations on the project, and I found that really encouraging. And I think it's exciting to see it recorded as a story, because I met Naina a couple of years ago, and I believe a lot of the work was done. And I remember walking into the building and thinking, wow, like they've kept the building up well. You know, like simple, but so much work has gone into it. And so much of it comes from, you know, people from, you know, contractors who just have this kind of assumed not ideal reputation. So that's been very encouraging to see. So keep up the work, sir. So there are these oddities, and even the Worley project, we've had a lot of support actually, and that doesn't mean everyone has been supported from government you know, positions, but you will find these people who just kind of burst out and say, I'm here to help, to support. So that gives one hope, absolutely.
One of the things I've always admired of conservationists is when they work with the state, which means they work with the municipal corporation, they work with the ward office, they work with the state government, urban development department, Mumbai Heritage Conservation Committee. We have layers and layers and layers. And I'm keen to know what's the secret of Vikas's magic that he keeps getting these projects and works with these very difficult odds, and how does he negotiate private buildings and residents?
That's a tricky one. So private buildings, it's simpler, but difficult to get people on the same page. I was doing an example of one of the buildings where I was renovating a lobby. Most people, say a majority of 50%, wanted to retain the later Art Deco character. It's a 1950s building, so. But there were the 25% which wanted marble and wanted it to look as most updated as compared to this thing. So there was always this debate how to convince. So I just asked that let me demonstrate the marble effect in mosaic, and fortunately it worked. The 25% who were non-committal committal people, they also agreed with that. And that started how it, so it's sometimes if you get an opportunity to demonstrate, I think it works, like how you've done it for the bas relief. I think that can be a turning point where you hinge around something and you can convince how the whole thing can happen. So that way, but and in terms of dealing with government, if you meet some bureaucrats who are sensitive to the conservation aspect, it's easier. Like I remember Flora Fountain took 8 years before it could really get executed. And it was hats off to the municipal commissioner, Mr. Kunte, who said anything in the circle would be done by a non-BMC contractor. So that's how Intact Mumbai chapter got involved with the help of conservators. So we know what area is one's expertise. And if you try to mix that, and that requires special care and attention. So it took us 2.5 years just to clean Flora Fountain. If this was a normal contract, you can see so many other government projects where it's just done in 3 days or 4 days. That's not conservation, that's something else.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to add that Vikas is a bit of an authority on water fountains. He's done the Mulji Jetha water fountain. He's also done Flora Fountain, and I think at one time he was studying hydraulics, which had nothing to do with conservation, because he was trying to understand how a fountain built in 1880s, how did it work? And how did it work so perfectly? And what was the pumping system? And what was the flow of water? And I think that was a huge learning experience for you from what I can see. I think both of you are also, by virtue of being conservationists, are also historians in a sense, right? You're both researchers. Robert, you even call yourself a civic historian and an archivist, and that's come through so beautifully in your book, Bombay Imagined. Um, One day you're working on a children's museum, the next day you're working on a crematorium. You've also done Hathi Gaon in Rajasthan, which is a home for mahouts and is an exceptional piece of design. And for Vikas, likewise, one day it's a dargah and one day it's a water fountain. So I guess my question is, how do you access sources of information and knowledge to make the integrity of your project as accurate as possible?
When I started my career, I was fortunate that I had a good mentor, Foy Nissen, who used to help with a lot of information since he had seen and had helped many architectural historians. So I learned a lot from him to appreciate finer, smaller details, and he used to share informations. He put me in touch with many more historians like Dr. Christopher London, Dr. Colin Cunningham. So while we were restoring the Corporation Hall of the Municipal Corporation, you got very good information on the coats of arms, the colors, and other things. These are small details which makes the project really successful if you start seeing details. So that was the initial phases when you're dealing with significant buildings. But when you start dealing with lesser significant buildings or insignificant buildings, you have to talk to the building and understand more from it. I remember working on a building called Hirabag, which is in CP Tank. And, we just asked the painter to paint, and we were planning to polish the main rafters and paint the ceiling. But he suddenly, while he was scraping, and if you're a conservation architect who visits sites more, you saw that there was a kind of a stencil motif on the ceiling. So when we removed the paint, we discovered HB written on it, which stands for Hirabag. And we've restored it to the great meticulousness. So as I said to you, sometimes the clues are hidden in the building. Like for an example, in Yacht Club, the color scheme was hidden behind the switchboard, which was, once you remove an old switchboard, you find the old color scheme which was there. So that became the clue. It's not that I wanted this color. In all my projects, you try to search for clues which are there, and the building does talk to you if you talk to the building.
So with, of course, with historical research, it's of course a bit different. Google's not generally a good source. So you have institutes like the Asiatic, like the State Archives, that are fantastic, right? They're physical objects, archives that once they're kind of cross-referenced, you can ascertain authenticity, accuracy. So that's historical research. Then buildings are complicated, right? Because they keep changing, technologies keep changing, technologies to deal with building systems change. And that's where people, I think, come into the picture. And I'm plugging the book because this is one of the first publications I've come across. I can't think of another book where kind of the story of how a building is treated comes out, not just objectively, but also through the people, through the individuals involved. And that's really important because when I'm working on a new construction project, I have a question, I have no book I go to, no encyclopedia that says this is how you should do this. I call someone who's an expert and say, this is the challenge. In your opinion, what should we do going forward? Then I call someone else and cross-check and come to a resolution. So people become that source of what's necessarily right. And they're all social contracts, which are really great. And that's why I love the interviews part of this handbook. It's not just a handbook, like this is how you fix a terrace tile, this is how you fix a bas relief. It's a handbook of conversations of people who have navigated these questions together, and then they come up with a question on typology. How do you deal with typology of Swastik Court? So they called Tanya George. Tanya types on Instagram for anyone who follows her. And I love that because it's such a great way to work. I think it's how we're meant to do creative work in collaboration with other people. So that's my kind of response of this question of authenticity. I think it's a great example of how it's put forth.
Thank you, Robert. Before we take questions from the audience, I'd just like to ask one slightly loaded question. Bombay is being redefined and redeveloped at an unprecedented rate. Given this, what quality of life do you envision the new urban form giving the people who live in this city? Candid answers are fine.
Oh, gosh. So yesterday I was at I'm going to give a diverted answer if that's okay. I was at an event yesterday evening, and this woman said, I've been living in Bombay for 50 years, and she said, I think the word I have is shame for how the city's developing. Those were her words. And she said it so poetically, so beautifully. It's difficult right now, I think. And again, I never thought in a Swastik Court Handbook I would hear someone say commuting is a challenge. Atul, you said it. Atul says in this book, commuting is challenging in Bombay, and it is, despite the fact that you can read peacefully in the train. That's a plus point. But the quality of life is currently decreasing, I think, is my analysis. It is decreasing, which is, it's why we have to have these kind of private, resident-driven interventions locally in different parts of the city. It's my analysis that's actually the future, rather than grand plans to make it livable for everyone. No, we need these microcosms that are led by individuals, led by communities, not necessarily experts in their own fields, but then who build a team around them. And I think that's what will, in the short term, make the city worth living for. And then long term is anyone's guess, but yeah.
Yeah, so initially when I was practicing as a conservation architect, I think historicity and authenticity used to be the foremost thing which we used to keep. But a lot of things have changed for me. According to me, I now try to teach, since I am into academics also, that it's if someone can prove that today's architecture can be tomorrow's heritage, then you may be able to pull down something. But if the fact that you can't have today's architecture which would be tomorrow's heritage, you shouldn't pull down what you have. So that's one factor which really helps. Because you've been seeing how the interventions which were done to improve the city by City Improvement Trust or Bombay Improvement Trust, the entire urban design or the town planning quality, it's just completely eroded. You have buildings which have no scale and different scale which doesn't speak of a cohesive city. That's alarming and that's disturbing because it's also affecting the quality of life. If you conserve buildings, you're retaining the social, economical, the social character which people have, been staying there for so long. It's not a burden on the fragile infrastructure. So having restored at least 12 buildings of, Parsi, in Parsi colonies, you realize that people are more comfortable. The kids still play on in the alleys there, and otherwise you'll just have podiums. So, and you need a mix of green and brown both. You need new development to happen. So the best way and the best approach would be to have an urban renewal where you are conserving, you're developing, and it's a mixed match of both, rather than just taking redevelopment as the only alternative, which the city can't cope up.
Thank you. We'll take questions from the audience.
The heritage buildings are 100 years old. The Art Deco buildings are from the 19th century, from 1930 onwards. Taking into account the sterling work that all of us have done, can you help us by knowing if we can have some connect between the heritage buildings and the Art Deco buildings to maintain the history of our city? My main question is this.
That's an interesting question. I think we're all struggling to give you an answer. None of us wants to take the mic on this one. but let me give it a shot. I think the city is constantly evolving, right? Nothing is ever static. And the urban form is evolving. And I think what Vikas said kind of relates to that in the sense that we need to have a balance between, small neighborhoods and communities which still retain their essential character and act as a bridge between some of the redevelopment work so that the essential identity of the city is maintained, right? The older properties are actually afford you a fabulous quality of life. You have tall ceilings, you have cool flooring, you have windows, you have natural light and air, you have large spacious rooms. That affords a certain style and quality of living which is very special compared to some of the modern buildings where you have tiny rooms and you have a huge garden outside, but your essential living space is very compromised. So I think somewhere along those lines is a bridge that we can try and build. And I like to think that in the southern tip of Bombay, there's a certain heightened sensitization around that, unlike some of the much more northern suburbs where the development is really seems to be the only way out.
Yeah.
So you spoke about the northern suburbs and redevelopment being the only option, but even the southern part of Bombay, it's become so that certain parts, say for instance, like if you leave a few buildings in Churchgate, if you leave Perambar, if you leave all those other places, Bhuleshwar, there's a lack of advocacy in terms of picking it up, in terms of the residents and in terms of the parking system like coming in. So where does something like an intact come in, at least in terms of building advocacy, because what's turning out can be a massive disaster later. If you look at the lanes of Gurgaon, all the old buildings being razed down and like many cars coming in, no proper sanitation systems can probably work with so many cars around there. So where does advocacy come in there? Because there are certain pockets which aren't probably as exposed to schemes, to probably not as profitable methods as you are providing. So where does this zone of advocacy come from the government?
I think the simplistic answer is if you have a Naina Katpalya in each zone, you'll have advocacy of an unprecedented level. She has devoted a large part of her life to keeping this part of the city and giving it the character that it has. But maybe Vikas or Robert.
Since you mentioned CP Tank, so as I said, I was fortunate to work on one of the buildings, which is Hirabag, how buildings used to work earlier was that the rents of the commercial used to subsidize the Dharamsala. But when the Rent Control Act came in, the rents got frozen and the activities which it was supposed to subsidize stopped. It's at that stage, I was fortunate to have clients who decided that they would like to renovate or refurbish that property. And what is interesting is that once we provided better amenities like air conditioning, better lighting, and once we've restored it, the hall is now being used multi-purposely for so many things, apart from commercial shoots in ads and other things. So it's generated awareness, it's generated revenue, and you need not pull it down because it's becoming a sustainable model. Everything in conservation revolves around economics. And if you can balance that economical, this thing, like if you go to Kochi and if you go to other places, there are no heritage bylaws, but no one would be stupid enough to demolish a property which has worthy character and which is getting converted into a cafe and things like that. So we need to give incentives. The economic viability is the most important. That's something which should be encouraged. And if you can discourage redevelopment, indiscriminate redevelopment, because certain areas, the densities are not increasing. The densities are increasing further north in suburbs. So why to have higher FSIs in areas where there's a decrease in density?
Mine is a very simple question, because when we restore a building, the final renovation or restoration which is done is on the facade, external facade and the internal chalk. Which are the colors most closely identified with Art Deco?
Professor, can I defer this question to you? No. I think we've had many a conversation around this, and Firstly, as an introduction, if I may, Marinosh, Mr. Sidwa lives in Suna Mahal, which is the building that hosts the logo of Art Deco Mumbai and also Jazz by the Bay and Pizza by the Bay. We've had many conversations around this with Professor Dalvi from JJ College of Architecture, who's also our trustee. So, Professor, if you would like to.
From what we have been able to see using older records and things like that, the color palettes when the buildings originally came up seem to have been much brighter and much more, I suppose the word today would be gaudier than what we normally assume Art Deco buildings to be. And we seem to have this idea of this very laid-back appearance with pastel shades and so on. But if you look at, the older publications where you have these hand-colored black and white images, you will see how bright they are. And today we can see that brightness, say, in the way we see flooring. The flooring can give us an example of the brightness that the facades themselves would at one point have had.
Yeah, Art Deco flooring is actually, if you saw the lobby of this building, it has such vibrant colors, And I always pose the question that today if an architect came to you and said, I'd like to do your lobby in red, brown, purple, yellow, and shades of gray, would you agree? And you would probably fire them, saying that they don't know what they're talking about. But when you look at this building and you see some of the other properties around town, including Suna Mahal, it's a riot of color. And you say, oh wow, this is so cool and this is so modern, when actually it is, almost 85 years old. So
We have this honor now to take Naina's words to live in the most decrepit building along the Oval. But having been their neighbors and looking at all the work and how fast it was done, we've decided to retain Mr. Savane and lean on Atul. So thank you very much.
Oh, that's really heartening, because I think we would like to end it on the note where we hope this conversation inspires you on what you can possibly do with your property. And if we can even do that much, and I think the fact that this building is now in the fold with Mr. Savane, I think that's a huge win for. And your neighboring, it's actually the building adjoining Swastik Court, and I think the residents saw what could be done to Swastik Court, and they said, "Oh my God, we can do something special." And yeah. So we'll try and change yours to the second most stunning building on the Oval Precinct.
Thank you all for being here. I think the draw for this morning, of course, is the work that Vikas and Robert have been doing in the city, but it's also everyone's sort of commitment to build a city that is worth living in. And I think all the interest that has been shown towards Swastik Court also is testament to that. Just as a token of our appreciation, we have a little something for Vikas and Robert, which we would like our trustee, Professor Mustansir Dalvi, to please hand over.
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. We do have a couple of people we'd like to thank before we close today's session. Of course, the Ghoda Arts Festival, Brinda Miller, for putting together this festival despite all odds. The residents of Swastik Court, without whom our handbook and all of the conversation that we've been having today would not have been possible. My team at Art Deco Mumbai, all my colleagues for putting this event together. And of course, all you lovely people for coming out today and making this morning a success.